Peter Dinklage comes into this as when Rachel Zegler was cast, he laughed at Disney saying it's fake progressivism.
Literally no offense to anything. They're very proud to cast a Latino actress as Snow White. It makes no sense to me. You're progressive in one way, but you're still making that backward story of 7 dwarves living in a cave. What the are you doing, man?
They're remaking the movie. They just got rid of the dwarves. Okay,
but what do they call them?
Why would they get rid of the
them
dwarves, though?
Magical creatures.
Because right now there's more dwarves on this podcast than there are in the new Snow White movie. And that's probably due to Peter Dinklage.
Yep.
Once hailed as Hollywood's golden girl, Rachel Zegler suddenly found herself drowning in a storm nobody saw coming. What fans are now calling the Snow White disaster. And honestly, disaster doesn't even begin to cover it. We're talking about a full-blown tidal wave of backlash, bombed test screenings, ugly behind-the-scenes feuds, and an avalanche of controversy that nearly sank Disney's live-action remake before it even set sail.
The argument should have been from Peter Dinklage. There's power of being on TV, there's power of television, and to put 7 people with dwarfism on camera in a major Disney movie, there's still power there. If the story is offensive, change the story, don't change the characters.
But just when you thought it couldn't get messier, boom! A shocking new twist exploded onto the scene. According to insiders, Zegler has been pointing fingers at none other than Peter Dinklage. Yep, you heard that right. Suddenly, the internet was on fire again. Was Dinklage the real spark behind this chaos? Why would Rachel single him out? Or is this whole mess just another messy symptom of Hollywood's struggle to drag its dusty old fairy tales into the modern age without tripping over itself?
Said it's now being reported they won't be Little People and will be called the 7 Bandits instead, which has fans outraged. With a $200 million budget, this is likely going to fail and cost Disney $100 million without him. Charles Pearl, subscribe to learn something.
Way before the movie even hit theaters, the entire project was already dripping in drama. Disney loudly declared it was reimagining the classic Snow White to fit a modern audience. They promised to fix the outdated themes of the original 1937 masterpiece. At first, fans were cautiously optimistic, casting Rachel as Snow White. Some cheered for the diversity win. Others braced for impact, fearing Disney was about to butcher a beloved classic beyond recognition.
We are now at a 1 out of 10 on IMDb for the new Snow White, and it couldn't happen to a better person. What is the lesson to be learned here with this Snow White disaster?
Yeah, we had more dwarfs than we did viewers in most of these theaters. And as you know, there were no dwarfs other than some CGI weird generated version of them.
And then Peter Dinklage dropped a bomb, publicly slamming the idea of portraying 7 dwarfs in what he believed could be an offensive, stereotypical way. Dinklage's words echoed across the industry. Suddenly, Disney was in full panic mode. How could they honor a classic and still avoid a PR nightmare?
The reason being that Peter Dinklage, who does have achondroplasia, finds the depiction of the 7 dwarfs very offensive. Peter Dinklage said that Disney casting Rachel Zegler is their way to feel good about themselves while ignoring a much bigger problem.
Throughout it all, Rachel stayed eerily silent. Whether by choice or because of tight Disney contracts, she kept her mouth shut. But whispers floated from the set, tensions were rising, reports claimed Disney was scrambling behind the scenes, rewriting the script like mad.
I haven't seen it yet, have you?
I have not.
I don't have plans to see it. It sounds terrible. It just sounds awful.
And right there, caught in the crossfire, was Rachel, stuck in a role that kept shifting beneath her feet. As filming wrapped up, horror stories started leaking. Editing was chaotic. The plot, muddled. Early test audiences were not impressed. They called the movie emotionally disconnected, awkward, and painfully obvious in its attempts to modernize, losing all the natural charm that made the original Snow White so timeless.
The fact that this film is completely falling apart, we're going to take a look at how bad this movie is actually doing in the box office, because it is hilariously bad. It is a complete and total humiliation for Disney, and like I said, they deserve it all, okay?
For a fairy tale as iconic as Snow White, this wasn't just a disappointment, it was a 5-alarm fire. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the creative team was battling it out. Some wanted to stay true to tradition, others wanted radical change, and stuck smack dab in the middle was poor Rachel, the public face of it all.
Do these orgies of CGI animation, recycling in a loveless format, the exact same, now every story is the same story about, again, a kick-ass female protagonist, like what, it's just so formulaic and rote and done without any love or originality whatsoever. I think that's the problem.
Even the most loyal Disney fans started turning on them, calling the movie a catastrophic failure in modern storytelling. By the time the release date crept closer, negativity was boiling over. Dinklage's comments still hanging over the project like a dark cloud, framing the whole thing in the worst possible light.
When you are in these kinds of roles, it is a privilege, and you actually have some contractual obligations that you're supposed to be doing no harm, and in fact, above doing no harm, adding value to elevating this artwork that you've put together with a whole army of people who, dedicate their lives to it. So I understand where the criticisms are coming from.
And who took the brunt of the backlash? Rachel Zegler. As the star, she became the easy scapegoat. Online, the term Snow White disaster became shorthand for the entire debacle. From Disney's clumsy infighting to the movie's lazy writing and preachy tone. Every time Rachel posted anything online or appeared in public, fans combed through her words, searching for regret, resentment, or signs she wanted out of this mess.
I really hope that I have a similar heart to hers. She has this beautiful, unending kindness and positive outlook towards the world and the world around us. I wish I could be as positive as she is at times. That's certainly a difference we have, but I think it's a very human thing to not always see the bright side. But that is part of the beauty of Snow White. It has been for 88 years now that she just sees the good in everyone and everything. And I hope that I and so many people who watch this film can embody that as well.
Meanwhile, online debates exploded. Some fans begged for hope. Others had already buried the film. Whispers swirled that Disney was secretly planning a fast-track reboot to replace the whole thing, and you won't believe the name that shot to the top of fan wish lists, Jenna Ortega. Fans dreamed of a fresh start with Jenna at the helm, someone who could bring both emotional depth and that sharp comedic edge Disney desperately needed. The fantasy of a Jenna-led Snow White reboot was suddenly giving fans something to be excited about again.
As an actor, you don't get to dictate anything. You don't get to dictate if a film actually happens. You don't get to dictate when it is shot, how it is shot, if you can ever speak about it to the public. You are simply just there to show up and say your lines and look the way they want you to look.
Even as Rachel's version continued to drown in criticism, an even juicier rumor popped up. Reports claimed Rachel was privately blaming Peter Dinklage for the movie's collapse. Allegedly, she felt his early criticisms about the dwarves triggered Disney's frantic script rewrites, which threw off the entire movie's tone, leaving her performance adrift in a story that didn't know what it wanted to be. Fair or not, the internet ran wild with it. Some sympathized with Rachel. Others thought she was just looking for someone to blame.
Snow White is the first American feature-length animated movie. 1937. It's one of the most beloved movies of all time.
But a lot of people pushed back hard. They argued the movie's problems ran way deeper than anything Dinklage said. The film's sloppy pacing, cringy messaging, and loss of fairy tale magic, that wasn't Peter Dinklage's fault. Maybe he lit the first spark, but the studio's clumsy overreaction built the whole bonfire. Insiders warned against blaming it all on one man, but the Rachel versus Dinklage drama refused to die. Some pointed out that Dinklage had a history of calling Hollywood out, so maybe his critique really did have a massive ripple effect.
On the original production, I was scared of it. Oh, it was so weird. It was a stalker. Like, I feel like if you are taking on the most iconic Disney role ever, genuinely, like this was the most prolific Disney film, I feel like you should kind of have some sort of reverence for the original production.
If Disney really did panic and overcorrect after Dinklage's comments, well, it's not hard to imagine how things spiraled into the total wreck we see now. And honestly, when you step back, Rachel's alleged frustration doesn't seem all that crazy. Those who followed the saga from the beginning could see it. The studio stumbled into a trap of its own making. When the movie finally limped into theaters, it carried the heavy baggage of months of controversy, dashed hopes, and sky-high expectations.
She's also just a spoiled, entitled, narcissistic brat who was perfectly willing, because she's not well, she might be stupid, but she's not so dumb that she didn't realize that by, for example, coming out and saying that all Trump supporters deserve to suffer for like, she's smart enough to know that, of course, that's going to upset a large portion of the potential audience for this project that I'm on.
Rachel's performance was no safer from the firestorm. Some said she gave it her all and did the best she could with the broken script she was handed. Others, they said it flat out. She was miscast. And where was Peter Dinklage during all of this chaos? Silent, dead, silent. And that silence, it spoke volumes. Was he distancing himself out of professional respect? Or was he just heartbroken to see the final product completely mishandle the very concerns he had tried to raise?
And this started with the movie star Rachel Zegler, who I believe would be categorized as a loudmouth dope.
The release came and went. A brief ripple of buzz online, but no real cultural impact. Inside Hollywood, people were already whispering, another cautionary tale. Snow White became a symbol of everything that can go wrong when too many egos, too many agendas, and too little planning collide. Some industry insiders said the collapse could have been avoided if only there had been a smarter balance between respecting the original and gently weaving in modern themes. Instead, after Dinklage's viral remarks, Disney had slammed on the brakes and overreacted, trying to prove how woke and aware they were. And in doing so, they wrecked the soul of the story.
God forbid a woman dream about true love. We're all just sitting around here, maybe I could be president one day. I hate men, I just want to be president. That screams Disney princess. Oh my God, I'm literally getting enraged. Once again, I feel like I'm back in 2022.
After the movie bombed, the whispers got louder. Disney might be quietly planning a full-on reset. Fresh writers, new direction. And yes, Jenna Ortega's name was tossed back into the rumor mill with wild enthusiasm. But even as fans clung to the hope of a reboot, one rumor refused to fade. That Rachel Zegler, behind closed doors, had confided how deeply she blamed Peter Dinklage for starting the whole chain reaction. It wasn't just frustration, it was personal. Allegedly, she felt blindsided, furious that she'd become the public face of a project tainted from the moment the Dwarfs controversy took over.
And Disney has canceled all of Rachel Zegler's appearances on their media platforms. Kind of tough if you are the biggest media company on earth to have that company turn against you.
No recordings, no hard proof ever surfaced. But to fans who had watched the movie's slow collapse, the story felt believable. Too believable. And at this point, some fans even flipped the narrative. They argued that Rachel should have spoken up earlier if she truly felt things were going off the rails. They said that if she had concerns, she owed it to herself and the legacy of Snow White to say something before it was too late.
Disney, despite losing over $1 billion on their last 4 movies, as they continue to shove woke politics into people's faces who just want to go to the movie, laugh, cry, and go home. Look, people don't want to be lectured when they're watching a movie, and they certainly don't want to be told that they're bad people. But that's what Disney continues to do.
Yes, Peter Dinklage's comments definitely stirred the pot, no doubt about that. But critics were clear. The film's problems went way beyond Dwarfs. It was the messy pacing, the thin characters, the preachy tone that turned people off. Dinklage may have struck the first blow, but Disney's panicked scramble to course correct is what truly buried the project. Still, if Rachel did believe Dinklage was the tipping point, it would explain a lot. Disney, true to form, refused to acknowledge any of the noise publicly. Their strategy? Ride out the storm and hope everyone eventually moved on. Maybe they will, but not before the Snow White saga becomes a permanent part of Disney's long, messy history of remake misfires.
I know this point has been made, but this truly is the worst casting maybe in the history of the film industry.
This wasn't just a box office flop, it was a cautionary tale for the ages. Journalists tried to get a real comment from either Rachel or Peter, but they both kept things vague, dodging questions like pros.
This is someone who is as entitled as, I don't need your business.
And if you disagree with this sentiment, I don't need your business. Thanks.
You know what? Maybe Disney does. Maybe you're a tool, you're a pawn in this film. You didn't write it, you didn't direct it. You have nothing to do with the creation of Snow White. Right. You should shut up and do the job.
As the headlines faded, Snow White's disaster lived on in Reddit threads, YouTube breakdowns, and endless gossip columns. It wasn't just about 2 actors anymore. It was about the bigger nightmare every studio faces, trying to modernize a beloved classic without alienating everyone.
The thing that really shocks me about this story, Disney and all these media companies, they invest hundreds of millions of dollars into these projects, right? Have they ever thought about maybe like a little bit of vulnerability study, opposition research, that sort of thing before you go and hire some Zoomer who's a lunatic?
In the months that followed, as Disney pushed out new films both in theaters and on streaming, the shadow of Snow White loomed large. Every time a remake was even decent, headlines praised it as proof that Disney had learned from Snow White's disaster. But when a project stumbled, the critics pounced, sighing, "Here we go again." The fallout wasn't just about one movie flopping, it became a cultural checkpoint for how badly things could spiral when studios tried too hard to please everyone and ended up pleasing no one. For Rachel Zegler, there was no escaping it. Snow White became tied to her name, like an unwanted tattoo. For Peter Dinklage, it became a cautionary tale, how a well-meaning comment meant to spark change could end up fueling a controversy bigger than anyone imagined.
So now, as the movie comes out, the two biggest stars in this movie can't stand each other to the point where they can't be in the same room, which forced Disney, in their infinite wisdom, to cut back on doing a formal premiere.
Adding even more mess to the firestorm were whispers from inside Disney itself. Some insiders struggled with whether to even stand behind the project anymore. There were hushed claims that the studio's marketing team tried to do a soft reframe, highlighting empowerment and inclusivity themes instead of addressing the dwarf controversy head-on. But by then, it was way too late. The label of disaster had already cemented itself in pop culture. No amount of glossy PR could undo the months of leaks, bad test screening buzz, and endless TikTok rants tearing the movie apart before it even premiered.
Kind of a Disney magic that had depth, that had absolute, it was riveting. And it's based, of course, on a Brothers Grimm story.
Of course, when Hollywood bombs this badly, the blame game never stays quiet for long. Maybe Rachel Zegler, still early in her rising career, felt overwhelmed by the tidal wave of hate. Maybe, emotionally, it made sense to believe that Dinklage's remarks started it all. And let's be real, once the internet smells a juicy rumor like that, it latches on with a death grip. Whether true or not didn't even matter anymore. It became the story.
In addition to that, there was already an uproar about her being cast as Snow White because she is not Caucasian, she is a Latina, she is half Colombian, and so people were like, why were you cast in the first place? We just had a black Little Mermaid, now we're having a Latina Snow White, and she is literally called Snow White. This doesn't make sense.
But inside Hollywood, the Snow White disaster triggered a reckoning. Disney had built its empire by repackaging nostalgia, betting that polished effects and big-name casts could cover up weak storytelling. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it flopped quietly, but this flop was different. This was Snow White, the cornerstone of Disney's entire legacy. The first ever animated feature from 1937. Messing this up was like dropping the crown jewels into a sewer, and Peter Dinklage's original critique, meant to shine a light on issues of representation, showed just how fragile these modernization efforts really are. Fans fought online, some praising Dinklage for raising important points, others raging that Disney should have anticipated these criticisms instead of scrambling like amateurs halfway through production.
If you're a studio, if you're a director, if you're a casting director, you've got to think twice or three times before hiring her. Listen.
At the end of the day, the Snow White meltdown wasn't just about one bad decision or one actor's comment. It was the perfect storm. A shaky script, an inconsistent tone, a desperate need to seem modern without losing the magic, and sky-high expectations hanging over every move Disney made. The whispered rift between Rachel Zegler and Peter Dinklage became the face of that disaster, a symbol of a movie that never had a chance to find its footing. Instead of blending the old and the new with love and care, Snow White wobbled awkwardly between clumsy nostalgia and ham-fisted wokeness, pleasing nobody, satisfying no one. If the rumors about Rachel blaming Peter are true, she learned that lesson the hard way. If they're false, well, the internet sure didn't care. Either way, the Snow White saga added yet another messy, emotional, unforgettable chapter to the long, chaotic history of Hollywood disasters.